Okay, thanks everyone for joining the webinar today. Gatsby for Agencies and Teams, Better, Faster, Smarter. We are excited to have a couple of really welcomed guest presenters, as well as Kyle Mathews, creator of Gatsby. A couple announcements before we get started. First of all, I just want to welcome everyone. This webinar will be recorded, and the recording will be available on our website, gatsbyjs.com, after the live webinar. And the recording link will be sent to all registrants. So if there's a portion of the webinar you didn't miss, please catch the recording. All of the attendees will be on mute. So we do want to welcome questions. If you do have questions, please put them in the question chat window. And we have a couple of panelists that will be answering them throughout the presentation. And we're also holding time at the end of the webinar for questions as well. So we'll do our best to get to all of your questions. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started and introduce our speakers today. So we're really pleased to have a couple of wonderful speakers. Ben Robertson is a front-end developer at Mediacurrent. And Ben is based in South Carolina, and Mediacurrent is a full-service digital agency, about 80 people. They focus on open source software solutions for enterprise organizations, especially those organizations looking for a better return on their investment. We also have Brian Webster, founder of Delicious Simplicity. Brian is based in LA, is a web developer and a strategist. And in 2009, he co-founded Delicious Simplicity, which is a boutique design and development group. He's entirely self-taught, and Brian has spent much of his time focused on full-stack PHP, WordPress, and Drupal sites. And in his own words, he says, until like an oasis in the desert, he discovered Gatsby in the Jamstack community and has been a passionate proponent ever since. So beyond website development, Brian is also an accomplished DJ and a passionate martial artist. And we have Kyle Mathews joining us also, the creator of Gatsby. He's passionate about making the web a better place for developers and users and content creators. And he's also an avid reader of all interesting things such as blogs, books, and tweets. And I'm Linda Watkins. I have been working in marketing and tech for the past 10 years. I've worked for large tech companies such as Cisco and AWS, as well as small startups, including Pantheon, Databricks, and now Gatsby. I love working in tech and bridging the gap between technology and users. And I'm also a professional flutist, and I love riding my red Vespa in the summer. So with that, we're going to start with our first presenter. Ben, I'm going to turn it over to you. Let me make sure you're the presenter. Okay, you should have the controls, and you'll just want to take yourself off mute.
Yeah, sorry. Is Kyle starting?
Oh, you're so right. I'm very sorry. We are starting with Kyle. Okay, Kyle, I'm going to put it over to you. Thanks for the reminder, Ben. Kyle's going to give us an overview of Gatsby. And you might still be on mute, Kyle.
Okay, got it. Yeah. Hey everyone, really glad to be presenting here today about Gatsby. And so Gatsby is Gatsby is a free and open source web framework based on React that helps developers build blazing fast websites and apps. And so like many of you, I started web development during kind of the CMS era, around 2006ish. And I remember reading over like comparisons of all the different open source CMSs and just spending hours over them and like analyzing them, and I'm trying to understand like why they chose different things and so forth. Eventually chose Drupal. And during college, I spent a lot of time building websites for clients, a little freelancing on the side to make money. And then after college, I was an early employee at Pantheon, and I worked there several years building tools for agencies and large companies using Pantheon, and just learned a lot about, talked to a ton of agencies and learned a lot about, kind of your needs and how you go about doing things, which is like a super interesting and fun and fulfilling time. And then Gatsby came about 4 years ago as a simple way to build websites with React. So I started getting into React, and I saw it as a, kind of a potentially better way to build websites. And when I was designing Gatsby, I took everything I learned from my years in the CMS world at Pantheon, and how to build websites that are super high quality, that are easy to maintain, that are fast to build, and kind of put that into the design of Gatsby. And 4 years later, there's tens of thousands of apps and websites built with Gatsby and a thriving ecosystem of OSS contributors and services. That's really kind of satisfying to see. So sites you may have seen, like the React.js.org website built with Gatsby, innovative companies like Impossible Burgers, and there's hundreds more at the showcase you can check out. And then a year ago, my co-founder Sam Bogwit, we founded a startup to help grow Gatsby. And we're modeling ourselves after a lot of other great kind of OSS companies that have emerged the last few years, like Elastic, Confluent, and HashiCorp. And our goal is to build both a tremendous OSS ecosystem and also to create powerful cloud services that help tens of thousands of customers, with their business. Because we believe the future of software is kind of that nexus of OSS, software, and ecosystem combined with enabling cloud services. And our first cloud product is now in beta, actually, which we're super excited about, which is Gatsby Preview, which I won't touch on now, but it solves a lot of kind of long-standing problems with static sites, in that it lets you give your content editors kind of a live preview. And this is the Gatsby Inc. team. We've grown quite a bit in the last year. It's a fun photo. Yeah, so what makes Gatsby different? There's several things. We did kind of a recent rebranding-ish exercise on the homepage, and we're like, what is like the one phrase that really encapsulates what we're trying to accomplish here at Gatsby? And we settled on fast in every way that matters. A lot of people know Gatsby because it creates fast websites, which is of course a huge part of it. But we're also we try to be fast in a lot of other ways, in the kind of developer experience, and kind of the operation experience, how it feels to operate your website. We want these to be quick and simple and fast. So one way we distinguish ourselves, like first-class support for performance. I like to mingle this quote by J.S. Tolstoy a bit, where and fast websites are all alike, but every slow website is slow in its own way. Meaning that there's, you've probably all read, performance, guides or whatever, 50 things you need to do to make your website fast or whatever. And what's interesting is they're all pretty much the same thing. You want to deliver the initial HTML payload as quickly as possible. It needs to be lean and mean. You want to have a fast initial paint, minimize JavaScript. You want to prefetch, et cetera, et cetera. And with Gatsby, we just try to take these giant checklists and then just put it into the framework so you don't have to worry about it. So we think of Gatsby as like a web compiler. So just kind of normal code compilers, we take this high-level language, in our case, components, and then we compile it to the web platform. So it's so the site is as fast as possible. Yeah, with most frameworks, I think this is playing out. In a lot of frameworks, it's you have to work hard to build a fast website. With Gatsby, it's hard to build a slow website. And with this kind of approach to pre-compiling or pre-baking website assets, you lose worries about security. The cost of servers hosting goes down a lot. Deployment is way, way easier. And also a lot of other kind of complex architectural problems that you get with database-based sites just go away because there is none. Another way to distinguish ourselves is through support of the content mesh. We believe that monolithic CMS applications are being replaced by modular, specialized content systems. And so if you look at a typical website, in the past, this would have all been handled by a single website or a single kind of monolithic CMS application. But now it's very common to kind of be pulling in all these different specialized systems. and which is great because you get first-class tools that you can like pull together, but it adds a lot of complexity and to integrate them together in a way that's maintainable and performant. And so Gatsby has first-class support for this content mesh that's emerging, and through the use of React and GraphQL, we make we kind of tame the content mesh and make it like a delight to use. Also, Gatsby is optimized for fast changes. So as you all know, website requirements change all the time. So kind of a simple example of this is like, say there's a startup, they might launch with an HTML site, then they launch an app, then the marketer shows up and they're like, oh, the marketer doesn't want to edit HTML, we have to figure out some sort of way content editing thing to do that. They want to add a blog and they install WordPress at blog.startup.com. They had documentation, but they want to use Markdown, so engineers can maintain it, and now it's at docs.startup.com. And so you have like this cacophony of different technologies and like inevitably different styles and different systems to maintain them and so forth. And the reason is that most web systems work until they don't. But wouldn't it be nicer, of course, if sites, if all these kind of different functionality, all these different requirements that kind of accumulated over the life cycle of the company were all part of one system with shared tech and components and one dev prod workflow. And that's what we aim Gatsby to be, just to be an incredibly flexible toolkit for handling kind of all the requirements and that can be thrown at you, and that as as requirements of the website change, you can like quickly and easily adjust the website to meet them. And that's my presentation. Got it.
Great, thanks, Kyle. Again, if there are any questions for Kyle or the other presenters, go ahead and put them in the question window. I love seeing everybody's input as far as where you're listening from, so that's really fun to see. And a couple people were having trouble with the audio. If you are, the webinar is being recorded, so the recording should have all the audio there. So if you miss anything, then you can check out the recording afterwards. Okay, so just before we go to Ben, we're going to do a quick poll, and let's get this launched. So we'd love to know, how did you first hear about Gatsby? Did you hear about Gatsby on Twitter, or from a coworker or a friend, a Google search, at a conference, or a blog post? Or if it's none of the above, go ahead and put your answer in the chat window as well. We just love to hear how you've heard about Gatsby. So as soon as we get maybe 50% people voted, we'll close the poll. Great, I see a lot more votes coming in. And then I'll share the results with everyone as well before we switch over to Ben. Okay, great. We're at 60% voted, so a couple more seconds, then I'll close the poll. All right, great. We got up to, looks like 75%. All right, so closing the poll, share results. Okay, so it looks like word of mouth from a coworker or friend is a way lots of people hear about Gatsby. Blog post is another big one. And then kind of third is Twitter and Google search. All right, thanks everyone for answering the poll. We'll have 2 more polling questions later on in the webinar. And so with that, I'm going to now send it over to Ben. Okay, Ben, you should have the controls.
Okay, can you see my screen okay?
Yeah.
Awesome. So, hey everybody, I'm really excited to be here today with you. And what I want to do is share a little bit about how we've introduced Gatsby into our workflow at Mediacurrent and how things have changed as a result. So a couple of things I want to touch on are how our development process has changed since we've introduced Gatsby into the workflow. I want to talk about how Gatsby has influenced types of projects we're able to take on, and even how things like hiring and advancement are changing as a result. But first, I just want to introduce myself. So my name is Ben Robertson, like Linda said, and I'm in Greenville, South Carolina. And I'm a front-end developer. I started my career as a freelancer, hacking on WordPress and Joomla sites, And then I later ended up at a local agency here in Greenville doing some more WordPress work and getting into Drupal. And now I'm at Mediacurrent. Mediacurrent, we are an 80-person agency founded in 2007, and we have a really strong Drupal background. So we build like really big, complex Drupal websites, and like any big website, they can be complicated. And so we try to streamline our development process as much as possible to leverage efficiencies. And Gatsby is a tool that we have introduced in our process to help with that. So we started our first client Gatsby project last spring. And that went into production over the summer last year. And then since then, we just found ourselves reaching for Gatsby more and more. So let me dive in a little bit to our development process and how Gatsby has come into play. One of the things I loved when I first came to Mediacurrent is that the front-end team had a very established component-driven workflow. So instead of building out individual page templates within Drupal, we had a really nice workflow using a style guide generator called KSS Node. KSS has the option of using the same templating language as Drupal 8, which is Twig. So what we were able to do was have like the style guide directory inside of our Drupal themes. And then once we had designs for a project and there was like a basic Drupal structure set up, we on the front end team were able to split up each design into its component parts, like a navigation or a heading or a form or gallery, and then develop an HTML, CSS, and JavaScript instance of that component using sample data from a JSON file without having to connect the component to Drupal at all. And then whenever a portion of the CMS was completed that needed one of those components, somebody would import that component file wherever they needed to in the theme and pass in the real data. So compared to how I had been working with Drupal before coming to Mediacurrent, I just thought this was like an awesome workflow. It gave us a single source of truth for each component. The same template was used by both front-end and back-end developers. We didn't need to duplicate code. We didn't need to copy and paste markup. We could just reuse that same component anywhere it was needed. And it let the front-enders focus more on front-end specific concerns like semantics and richer interactivity and accessibility. And it let the back-end devs focus on what they do best as well. So it helped the whole team be better. But while the workflow had a lot of benefits, it also had a few drawbacks. So the first drawback is that there was still a somewhat complicated integration layer and process when we wanted to get the content out of the CMS and into the front-end template. So we found if we put the logic in a template file, it would often get unreadable. But if we did the integration logic in a PHP, it would lead our front-end devs like quickly outside their comfort zone. Another drawback that we ran into was the amount of like domain-specific Drupal knowledge that was required to do things right. So on the front end, when we were making new components, we weren't always considering how Drupal will cache the template, or our idea of what the data structure should be might not match what actually comes out of the CMS. So when the integration step came around, we would find that there would be a need to reconcile these problems, which means more time spent at the end of the project, which equates to more money spent, and that causes problems. And then the third and the last drawback we faced was performance issues. So with a traditional Drupal site, you have a whole host of places that might cause performance issues. You have your server, you have your host environment, you might have some bad PHP, or you might have something on the front end that's slowing things down. There's like the file compilation, or maybe the bundling is not doing, not correct. And since these are all intertwined in Drupal, you have to have a very specific set of knowledge and experience to effectively troubleshoot. So it's not enough to just know like the basics of front-end performance or how to write good PHP, but you also have to understand how Drupal does things. So like the caching layer, and you might have to do load testing on your server to make sure everything is working just right. So we had problems around the integration layer, just to review. Integration between front and back end. You have this kind of like a jack of all trades knowledge requirement to effectively work and troubleshoot issues. And then you have performance issues and stuff that goes along with that. So where does Gatsby come to play with these drawbacks? So first, let me just talk about the integration layer. So I mentioned how in our process, the front and back end teams were able to do asynchronous work on a new Drupal site. Because of the component-driven workflow, but when integration time came around, we could run into headaches. What I love about Gatsby, though, is the integration layer is GraphQL. So the syntax is really so simple, and it pretty much matches like a JSON-like structure. So like here you see like what we would have used, the JSON like placeholder content that we would have used when we were developing a component. And then right next to it, this is like the GraphQL query that we would create to match up with that. And it's really so similar. And I just think this goes like such a long way towards speeding up the development process, not to mention like clearing up maintenance issues that can creep in with crafty integration logic. So you don't need like a huge file with all the integration logic, because GraphQL kind of handles that for you. And when we were doing our first full Drupal 8 and Gatsby build last year, one of the biggest things that really stood out to me was not having to go back and restructure things once the CMS portion was complete. So once the CMS was in place, the integration work was really as simple as writing the GraphQL query to replace the JSON file that we had. And on that project, I think there was maybe one instance where I had to go back and change something during the integration process, but it was due to like the complexity of the component and not, it was like a big mega menu structure that we had to deal with. So it wasn't necessarily due to like that process, and having to only do that one place is it's really rare. So I think that the next drawback I talked about was like all the Drupal, WordPress, fill in the blank CMS knowledge required to troubleshoot issues effectively. I've called this like CMS centered development in the past. But what I've noticed working with Gatsby is that developers on both the front and back end are able to be a lot more productive. So I link this to a more clear separation between back end and front end concerns. With a Gatsby site, if something is running slow on the front end, you know that it's a front end problem, because for the most part, everything is rendered at build time. You can't get away with saying, oh, the user shouldn't have uploaded that large of an image, or Drupal didn't concatenate my JavaScript in the right order. But on the flip side, if something is not available in the API, you know for a fact that's a back-end issue. So just being able to quickly identify these issues, if something is front-end or back-end, it can save so much time. You don't have all this back and forth in Jira about who needs to fix what. And for us, time is money. So getting away from that back and forth really helps a lot. To a similar point, this separation lets backenders do what they like and excel at, and it lets frontenders do what they like and excel at. So I have this quote here from Zach on our front end team, and he said, when I asked our dev team what they liked about Gatsby, he said, "I love how I don't have to set up tooling with Gatsby." And I think that really gets at this point that Gatsby takes care of a lot of the tedious work, like the integration logic or the tooling, and it lets developers focus on making the most valuable, satisfying contributions that they can. We get to do the fun stuff because Gatsby takes care of maybe the more boring stuff. And the third drawback I mentioned was performance. So I already talked about how Gatsby helps us like better separate concerns and troubleshoot problems easier. And that definitely helps on the performance front. But like Gatsby goes so far beyond in helping us make our websites fast. One thing I heard Kyle say last year at Gatsby Days was that Gatsby makes the right thing the easy thing. And I really think this is like so true on the performance front. Each Gatsby site being static HTML means that we don't have to worry about the PHP or server performance anymore. But then on top of that, the built-in like preloading and prefetching, it just really blows any performance enhancements that we would do with Drupal or any CMS out of the water. It's incredible, like incredibly fast and incredibly easy to set up. So now that I've spent like a little bit of time about how our dev process has changed as a result of integrating Gatsby, what I want to do is spend a little bit of time talking about how Gatsby has changed the types of projects we take on. So I think one of the ways that working with Gatsby has influenced the kinds of projects we take on is because developer efficiency translates to project efficiency really well in this case. So I mentioned that our first Drupal 8 and Gatsby build, I mentioned that we did our first Drupal 8 Gatsby build last year. And that was a project that had a pretty tight budget for us. And it was our very first time working with Gatsby. I had never worked with Gatsby before. I don't think anybody else on the team, on the project team, had worked with Gatsby before. So we were like learning it fresh. But even though we were still learning the nuances of Gatsby along the way, I was amazed that we were able to finish the project on time and on budget. And like with that experience under our belt, we feel very confident that we can leverage that experience for even better efficiency in the future. We've even started working on integrating Gatsby into a Drupal install profile that we maintain. So that's what this rain install profile is. I think once we finish that, we're going to really be able to leverage the efficiency of working with Gatsby on smaller projects that we take on and still make them profitable for us, which makes everybody really happy at Mediacurrent. I think another way that working with Gatsby has influenced the kind of projects we take on is because it lets us do more specialized front-end work, which helps us get doing more specialized front-end work helps us get more front-end specific work. So we really like that Gatsby is based on React for a couple of reasons. One is that we find that Gatsby can be a friendly intro for some of our developers who maybe don't have React experience but want to get started. Not having to mess with like build tools really get some stumbling blocks out of the way. And like I noted here, everybody loves the docs. When I ask the team what they like about Gatsby, I like that it's pretty well documented. The docs are great. The docs people, just having great docs really helps developers, makes us all happy. The other reason that we like it is that having Gatsby work under our belt helps us secure other React projects that maybe aren't Gatsby projects. So every Gatsby project is a notch in our belt, is a notch in our React belt, and every React project gives us experience to help with our Gatsby project. So it's kind of helping us to build the front end team and our skill set, and it's leading us towards more JavaScript heavy development, but without succumbing to like this stack fragmentation where we're all working on different things and it doesn't translate well. So that's really a big positive from our side. And this kind of leads into how our Gatsby work is influencing even things like hiring and advancement at Mediacurrent. And this is really exciting to me. So, one issue that we can face when hiring front-end developers is that it can be difficult to find experienced front-end developers who also have Drupal experience. And our component-driven workflow that I talked about at Mediacurrent it's already gone a long way towards letting us hire based on front-end competency and then teaching the Drupal basics along the way. But as we start taking on more Gatsby and React projects, though, it's even less necessary to look for Drupal experience when we're hiring. So our hiring pool is a lot larger because there's a much larger overlap between top-notch front-end developers who have React experience, and that really helps us a lot. We get a lot more, just a much bigger pool to draw from. And then internally, we are starting to see openings for new advancements opportunities. And somebody who already works at Mediacurrent, this is very exciting for me. So traditionally on a project, we would have a lead developer who would work in an architect type role, and they would lead the direction of the project as it progressed. And for us, being very Drupal focused, these roles were typically played by our more backend type developers, since it really required in-depth knowledge and wide experience with the nuances of working with Drupal. I think as our front-end team becomes more specialized and our front-end builds become more advanced, we're really finding that some projects they're just only front-end projects. There's not a back-end requirement, or they require more focus on the front-end architecture than what we've had in the past. And this is opening up new avenues for us, for the front-end developers to take on leadership roles at the project level. I think we're going to start seeing our front-end team continue to grow in numbers, but then we're also going to start seeing job titles like lead front-end developer or front-end architect and stuff like that. And I know I'm excited about that, and a lot of people are really excited about that. It's going to really help the growth of Mediacurrent. So that is pretty much the inside scoop on Gatsby and Mediacurrent right now. We're all really excited about the future of Gatsby and being a part of building with Gatsby. If you want to learn more about Mediacurrent and what we do with open source, you can check out mediacurrent.com. If you have any questions about what I talked about today or anything about Gatsby at all, you can email me at ben.robertson@mediacurrent.com. And I will pass it back to Linda now.
Great. Thanks, Ben. Appreciate that. And we have one more poll now. This was a question that Ben submitted. So we'd love to know how many developers are on your team. However you classify your team, it could be your whole agency, or if you're at a large enterprise company, your kind of individual team. So I'll give you a minute to put in your question or your answers there to that question. Okay, great. We are starting to get a few more votes. And then once we get about 50% voted, I will share the results with you. And then after that, we're going to have our next guest speaker, who is Brian Webster from Delicious Simplicity, joining us today to talk about his experience with Gatsby. All right, we're at just over 60%. So I'm going to close this poll, share the results. Okay, so a lot of teams around 2 to 5, and then a mix in the other ranges. Great, thank you for answering that question. All right, now I'm going to turn it over to Brian. Whoops. Sorry, Brian, I accidentally muted you, but I'll fix that. Okay, there we go. Okay.
All right, am I coming through?
I can see your slides. Yeah, and I can hear you.
Excellent. All right. I'm excited to be here as well. Thanks, you guys, for putting this on. It's been a really busy time for us with Gatsby in 2018, and I think there's a lot of exciting things to sort of recap as to how it's changed our team, how it's affected projects, and opening with this statement that it really has been a legit game changer for us top to bottom. A little bit about who we are and the kind of projects we work on. A lot of nonprofit organizations, radio, video, broadcasting companies, news media sites, and a lot of political commentary. So extremely high traffic, a lot of pages, need for good SEO, server-side rendering, and some pretty strict time to live requirements in a lot of the projects as well. I thought it'd be helpful to kind of do a past, present, future look at how Gatsby has changed things for us. So starting with the past, agency life, BG, before Gatsby. Looking back now, getting to work with Gatsby for a year, that emoji kind of sums up looking back at the past approaches. This is a rough timeline of, where we kind of came from, humorously referring to that as the dark ages of, Flash sites and some custom ASCP.NET stuff and some PHP, a lot of basic kind of hand-coded HTML sites as well. And, we call that the dark ages, but the one thing that I think we liked about that was the OCD parts of our personality really liked having custom control over everything, especially in just the hand coding of the HTML. Then the bulk of the time we've been doing this, I'd say 2009 and 2016, really getting behind, open source CMSs. I left Joomla out of there, but kind of started there, and then really found our groove in Drupal and WordPress and Drupal primarily. And what we loved about that was to be able to deliver rich content ability to clients. But what we traded off in the process was some of that fine-grained control over the markup, wrestling with a lot of the markup that came out of Drupal, overriding templates. We arrived at a very similar workflow to what Ben talked about, which is like a component-driven approach, and having a style guide of helper classes and trying to be able to code the components as much in basic HTML as possible, and then bring it into Drupal, which worked well. And then in 2016 to 2018, a couple key concepts really caught our eye, and that was using static site generators like Jekyll for some of our simpler sites. The idea of the headless or decoupled WordPress or Drupal was really exciting because that got us to be able to leverage WordPress and Drupal for the stuff that we liked, the content editability, but then also start to be able to get back to coding the front ends by hand. And that gave way to some of the single page apps like Angular and React. We really fell in love with React. Component-driven architecture just really made sense to us. But the thing is, all of these three pieces, static site generators, we love because we could pretty much deploy anywhere, and it was, didn't really require any servers. The decoupled CMS was great because we got the back end, but then we had to have a Node or an Express server running to deal with the server-side rendering. That was consuming resources. And then the single page apps we loved as well for everything that we could, work with in terms of the modern JavaScript tooling. But there wasn't really a solution that combined all three of those until we encountered Gatsby. And there was much rejoicing. So Gatsby to us really is the best from the static site generators, the headless CMSs, and the single page apps all combined in Gatsby. It was funny hearing Kyle talk about his backstory of Pantheon and Drupal. Not knowing that is how I would have assessed Gatsby, that it reminded me of sort of a dream product from going through a very similar past experience as Kyle, but it really took the best of the best and put it into one framework. So 2018, like I said, was a really busy year for us. We had set a goal at the beginning of the year to try to move about half of our projects to Gatsby. By the end of the year, that actually ended up looking about moving 90%. the way we did this was we just looked at all the functionalities of all of our current projects and anything that was kind of coming or slated for development that year. And then we planned them out in order of complexity over the course of the entire year, trying to tackle 1 to 2 new challenges with each project. And by June, we had hit that 50% mark, and we were just thoroughly validated with how much we were in love with Gatsby. And the learning curve, once we got past that, the momentum and the reusability from project to project was so great that we just pretty much rode that wave through to the end of the year. And like I said, hit darn close to 90% of our current projects, as well as building pretty much every new project that came along in Gatsby as well. That brings us to Gatsby and clients. It's funny when we talk about microservice movement, all these different moving parts. You've got, a Shopify for your products, WordPress, all these different pieces, and it's easier to us as developers. It's simpler. It makes more sense. But when you talk to a client, maybe a less technical client, it can sound very convoluted. It's like, well, I've got 30 moving parts, whereas before my website was WordPress or my website was Drupal, and that can be deceptively simpler. So we needed to find a way to communicate it so they hear all these moving parts and that actually sounds like a positive rather than, just being sort of convoluted. So we love metaphor. Linda mentioned at the lead-in that it's to be a DJ, so I'm still kind of an audiophile on that. So I see it like this. The boombox is to WordPress and Drupal as I see it. And you can choose the sort of monolithic CMS or framework stack. And boomboxes aren't bad, they're great. There's a time and place where you specifically need a boombox. You're going to the beach, whatever you're doing, and they're awesome. Problem with them is if you ever wanted to upgrade the tape deck, add a CD player, change your speakers, you don't really have that level of flexibility. It's kind of tricky to do that. And I think one other important thing to touch on is we always talk about trying to pick the right tool for the right job as developers and builders. And you're still doing that in this instance. You're evaluating WordPress, maybe you're building a blog site, Drupal maybe for something else, but you still are really picking between 2 models of a boombox. It is one tool to express your entire content layer versus how we see Gatsby, which is sort of assembling the perfect modular content setup with Gatsby at the center. In this case, Gatsby being the receiver and your inputs being your various, content sources. It could be a Google spreadsheet. It could be, something from Contentful and Airtable and Shopify, and then goes out to, your AWS or Netlify or wherever you're hosting. And what we love about this is really speaks to the idea of the content mesh. Kyle touched on that. Sam did a really great blog post on Gatsby.com, which if you haven't read it, you should check it out. And it's this notion that let's take a site that has blog posts and products. Shopify is great at managing products, and they have a little blog utility in there, but it's not very full featured. So running your blog posts in WordPress, having your products in Shopify, and then maybe you've got some social media stuff in Instagram, all 3 of those things combined equal your content mesh, equal your content experience. These are your different content inputs. And if you look in the Gatsby plugin directory, you'll see there's pretty much a drop-in sources for all of those where you just basically configure it. And then you have that content to work with. You're writing one set of GraphQL to pull products from Shopify, posts from WordPress, posts from Instagram, and integrating it all together. And what's super exciting about this is if a day comes where you go, you know what, we want to move from WordPress to Ghost. You're trading out one piece of your componentry. You don't lose the entire stack, and you can progressively over time just build a really awesome stereo system, if you will. So because of that, we feel like we finally have the ability to choose the right tools, not just tool for the content. That it's not true that WordPress or Drupal is the right fit for every type of content. Now we can get down to the individual needs of the pieces of content, but still have it feel like a cohesive developer experience by working inside of Gatsby. Couple gotchas we've encountered in adopting it and talking to clients, waiting on builds for large sites. Time to live, I'll elaborate a little bit more on that at the end as to some strategies that we use there. Need for a preview environment. Obviously, we're fully headless and decoupled, and you need to see what your work is going to look like. We've built a couple of custom solutions in the beginning of the year, but if you've checked out Gatsby Preview, or if you haven't, definitely do that. I believe right now it's with Gatsby and Contentful, but the big picture is a lot of other headless CMSs as well. It's pretty amazing, full real-time previews of not just the piece of content you're working on, but your site as a whole. And the last one would be sort of redefining this notion of a static site. A lot of clients, I think, have sort of a preconceived meaning as to what that word means. Either the site doesn't change very often, they can't edit it, maybe it's somehow limited with functionality. They're always surprised when we show a site with a logged in experience that's quote unquote static. So that would be another thing that we've had to repeatedly communicate. That brings us to how Gatsby changed our dev team. It really has been sort of a back to the future type of moment for us. We talked about during the dark ages how there was a joy in sort of writing and controlling all your custom CSS and HTML. All that is back. The local environment and workflow out of the box is just a delight. The reusability from project to project is on a whole nother level. And it's just much easier to step away and return to a project without skipping a beat. Often in WordPress and Drupal, we found that when we would return to something, maybe we hadn't touched it for a while, we almost were having to kind of become reacquainted with our project. Whereas with Gatsby, it's just so standardized that the minute we pull down the repository, it just makes sense and we can get right to work. The performance is just lights out. I think we're all sleeping better at night knowing that the site's uptime is pretty much guaranteed. The Lighthouse scores out of the box are darn near perfect. The ease of upgrading between versions, this is a really big one for us, especially doing a lot of work in Drupal. Moving from Drupal 5 to 6, 6 to 7, 7 to 8, these were pretty major initiatives that had some pretty significant costs to them. Big deal for certain clients. Like I said, we started this Gatsby sprint in like the beginning of 2018 and moved about 90% over by the end of the year. A lot of that was done in Gatsby V1. So part of last year was also moving things from V1 to V2. And I would say we averaged pretty much a 1 to 2 day max time to move from V1 to V2. And most of that was actually spent in just refactoring like emotion and the styled components. The last thing would be, feels like writing in one language. That was a line from one of our developers, and it's really true. You're writing in GraphQL, you're writing your CSS, you're writing your HTML, your React, all these different languages, or you're working in some serverless functions, but it's all JavaScript, it's all JSON syntax compared to working in Drupal when you're in MySQL, and then you're in Drupal specific stuff, and then PHP, and then HTML and CSS. Those really did all feel like different languages. Here, it's more like different dialects. Like it's just what part of the country you're in rather than having to, really switch brains every time you switch from front end to back end code, which has really empowered the front end developers. The learning curve is great. The plugins and documentation, Ben touched on the docs, they really are world class. The component thinking has really brought together our design, front end and dev teams, and tasks that were formerly red lines for front end devs are now accomplishable. Ben also alluded to this as well. That's just equaling like opportunities for advancement. Great quote from one of our front end developers that I wouldn't be making functional components if the tech didn't meet me halfway. I never imagined being able to do this level of work as a front end dev / themer. And as a result of that, we've really felt like we've gained some additional dev staff without actually hiring anybody, which is huge. That brings us to serious stack envy. We've, as a result of working in Gatsby, formed some new partnerships with dev teams that have sought us out and really want to work in this tech. And in turn, that's helped us solve a persistent hiring and scale issue for quite a while, similar to what Ben touched on as well. Really hard to find Drupal talent and this sort of front end talent as well. This has really eliminated that, and we're looking at adding a large number of developers this year, which has been almost unimaginable in the previous tech stack. That brings us to the future and what we're kind of looking at solving in the road ahead. So technically speaking, we're just trying to stay focused on streamlining our workflow, writing reusable components, and continuing to tackle new challenges with each project. One of the big ones that we're always looking at, I mentioned before, I would circle back to is, performance, build times, and time to live. So for instance, one example, we work with, like I said, radio publications, and they have very strict time to live requirements. The second the show is supposed to broadcast at noon, it needs to be live on the website. It can't be waiting on a build. So deciding what piece of content will be client-side rendered. So for that example, the show page, all of the past episodes are part of the build process, but at the top, there's a collapsible region for the live show, which is using Apollo, GraphQL subscription. The second the show goes live instantaneously without having to refresh the page, that element is live. So when you have these big sites that have strict time to live requirements, it's usually true that not all the content has such a strict time to live requirement. Finding those pieces of the site that really need to be updated quick and solving those with a client-side rendered component can be a great solution. But we do have incremental builds to look forward to at the end of the year, which will really be a game changer on that front. And then big picture for us, continuing to expand the team, add more collaborators. Gatsby has freed up a lot of time for me, which has meant that I've been able to be a bit more active, give back in the community, spend time testing and giving feedback. And it's really allowed us to stay curious with new tech. I think before, the idea of a system coming along to replace part of our stack was very scary because of how much it meant redoing everything. But now, if we're in WordPress and then we decide to move to Contentful, or we go from Contentful to somewhere else, that's not that big of a deal. Back to the audio infrastructure, it's like swapping one of these inputs. So that's very exciting, and it makes us curious to, hey, keep up with the new services that are emerging and test them out, which all that combined, arguably the best thing of all, just has us saying yes to more and more projects, which I open with the statement that Gatsby has been a legit game changer for our team and for all the devs and agencies here today. I submit that it can be equally as big of a game changer for your team. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Brian. Really appreciate that. And just before we move on to the next portion of the presentation, one more poll for everybody. We're curious to know, what platform were you working with prior to Gatsby, or if you're not using Gatsby, which platform do you work with now? And it may be, one or more of these, but just kind of, choose the, I guess, the one you use the most. If your answer is other, feel free to put more details in the chat window as well. So we'll give everybody a minute to fill that out before going on to the next part of the presentation. Again, a big thank you to both Brian and Ben for joining us as guest speakers today. It's really beneficial to hear your perspective working at an agency or being an agency owner. Okay, we're just over 50%, almost 60% for the poll, so I'm going to go ahead and close it and share the results. Okay, so a lot of WordPress shops are here, some Drupal, some static, and quite a few other. So I'll look in the comments in the chat window to see what the other ones are, but thank you for participating in that. Okay, so now I will go ahead and share my presentation. And this portion is taking a few minutes to talk about, how do you talk to your agency or your clients or your team about Gatsby? There were a couple of questions that came through on the chat window about that as well. So I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about that. First of all, you want to consider your audience. Who are you talking to? Is this a client? Are you talking to a marketer, a business leader, a team member, or your grandma? Think about, what do they care about? It may be very different than why you chose Gatsby or why you are using the tech stack that you do. So just take a few minutes to think about, who is your audience and what do they care about? And then I would recommend to keep it simple. As an example, my dad is an electrical engineer. He's very smart and he is very detail oriented. And when I was younger, sometimes my sisters and I would ask him questions about what he did at work. He wrote a book about comprehensive filter design. We asked him questions about that. And oftentimes he would go into a very lengthy description, very detailed and completely accurate, which was excellent in a certain way, but also a little overwhelming for a 10-year-old. And many times that could have ended in him pulling us over to his big shelf of encyclopedias and giving us a lengthy reading assignment. So it sometimes is a little too much too soon and made me feel a little bit like this picture here. And because there was so much coming at me, I didn't quite absorb anything. So keep that in mind as well when you're talking to someone. If they're asking about, what tech stack are you using and why, just think through, what information do they want? Are they seeking after? Another great approach is to make sure you focus on the outcome, especially if you're talking to a business leader, a team manager, a marketer, a client. Many times they are very much focused on what will be the output of this website, what's the impact of it. So you can talk about search engine optimization. How are static site generators better for search engine optimization? And then, of course, Gatsby's really excellent at creating a blazing fast website. So how does that impact lead conversion? That may seem like a no-brainer to you, but you'll want to talk about that and help them connect the dots. Faster site, better user experience, greater lead conversion. Also, the importance of working with a productive team. If a team manager is able to give the tech stack and the tools to their team that they want to work with, but are also make their lives a little bit easier and do some of the heavy lifting for them, they'll have a more productive team, which makes everybody's life a lot easier and will give you a better end product. And of course, revenue. Many clients, of course, are looking for a return on their investment, especially for websites such as e-commerce sites, where literally, if you have a slower site, you are generating less revenue. Another great way is to give examples. If you have use case examples, case studies, feel free to look on the Gatsby site showcase for examples. We also post case studies on our blog. So as an example of giving an example, I'm going to share a case study with you now. UFit Health Clubs, they have a lot of gyms throughout the US, and they recently redid their site with Gatsby. So I love their homepage right now. I think it's very humorous and fun. This is how their website looks now. But before they redid it with Gatsby, they had a few challenges. Their site was very slow, and they were hoping to use their site as one of the biggest lead conversion and lead sourcing channels for them, because they have specific pages on their site for the different regions and locations where their gyms are located. You can type in your zip code and it tells you exactly which gyms are closest to you. But their site was very slow. Many pages took many seconds to load. They had a 60% bounce rate. They were losing customers, and it was also a really poor experience on mobile. So this potentially really important channel for them wasn't working for them because they had a poor experience, a user experience on their website. So after redoing their site with Gatsby, they were able to increase their lead conversion by 60%. Their site was much, much faster, a much better experience for the site visitor. This also increased their organic search traffic by 22%, and their accessibility score increased as well, which also impacted their Google search ranking. So quite a few things making their organic search ranking climb, which is quite important for them. And then, of course, their new site was much more optimized for mobile, which of course is a huge trend we see, is a lot more people are accessing websites on mobile versus desktop. So Zach, who is the director of digital marketing at UFit, after the site refresh, said the website went from a burden to a strategic tool we use to capture leads and generate ROI. So the initial purpose of their website was able to really come to fruition when they were able to use the technology needed to redo their site. So that was just a quick example for you. If you want more details around how to position Gatsby to clients, we do have a few blog posts on the topic at gatsbyjs.org/blog. Also, if you haven't done a Gatsby project yet, please go to gatsbyjs.org. You can get started there. And I also wanted to quickly give a quick update for this audience about Gatsby Preview Beta. This was something that Brian mentioned. Gatsby Preview is a way for you and your clients and your team members to see the changes to the website before it goes live. So you see all of those changes in context. You know, if you change the header or an image or, you know, placement of a video or something, you can see all of those changes with this live URL, with the URL before you go live. So that's especially important for working with clients. If you're interested in getting a free trial of Gatsby Preview Beta, just go to gatsbyjs.com/preview and you can sign up for the wait list there. It's a closed beta, so we're slowly rolling this out, but if you get on the wait list, then we'll let you know as soon as it's available. Okay, well, we have just a couple of minutes for questions, and there were quite a few that came in through the presentations. So I think I'll open it up to Kyle or Sam. Since you've been monitoring the questions, maybe you can bring out one or two questions that you think are particularly important to discuss with the whole group. And you'll just want to unmute yourself.
Yeah, well, first, one quick thing is a lot of people seem to have had audio problems during the webinar. And so if you are unfortunately one of those people, we will be sending out the full recording of the webinar, and you'll be able to kind of fill in the missing pieces afterwards. So yeah, sorry about that. We'll look into why that was happening. Sam, do you have any question you want to jump on?
A lot of the questions that I saw were about how to explain this to other people at your agency, and I just want to, obviously Linda touched on that a lot, but I just wanted to emphasize what she said, focusing on the benefits to the person that you're talking to. If they're a developer, then that might be sharing your experience and how that helped your development workflow. But if they're not a developer, just thinking about what matters to them, and then explaining the benefits of Gatsby in terms of speed or conversion rate optimization in terms of what matters to them. So just emphasizing what Linda said.
Yeah, another common question was around, how to show, content changes as quickly as possible. People are like, do you set up like polling or kind of do a cron job sort of thing where you like rerun builds every now and then or whatever. And what we recommend, and a lot of people do this really successfully, is any content store, content service that you're using, CMS or whatever, will have webhook support, so that whenever a user changes, like a client changes their content, that can trigger a webhook that's sent to your build service that will then automatically rebuild and redeploy your website. And this is like very safe and very easy to set up, and a lot of people redeploy their Gatsby site dozens, if not hundreds of times a day, just based on content changes. And with optimized build environment, almost any site should rebuild in under a minute, which means that content person changes something, that content will then be live in under a minute. Linda, can I show my screen real quick?
Yeah, let me make you the presenter.
Okay.
Okay, there you go.
Cool. So also, a lot of people are asking about swag, and if you haven't seen our Gatsby store, it's at store.gatsbyjs.org, and we have some of the best t-shirts around, and socks, and stickers, and hats, and well, a lot of things actually. But yeah, so we also have free shipping worldwide. So somebody was asking like, how do you get swag to Cameroon? So just come here and get some stickers, get a t-shirt, and we'll send it to you.
Great. Thanks, Kyle and Sam. Any other last points you wanted to bring out before we close?
I'll jump in with one really quickly. Someone commented and said that they were very interested to hear more about kind of what the workflow was like at both Ben and Brian's agencies, and specifically for Ben. Ben did a talk in December at Gatsby Day about the workflow at Mediacurrent, and he's also written a blog post. So if you search for Ben Robertson Gatsby Days, you should be able to find that material if you want to dive deeper into his presentation.
Great, thank you. Well, we're just about out of time, so I just want to say thank you for everyone for joining. The recording will be available on our website later this afternoon. The link will also be sent to all of the registrants. So everybody on this call and everybody who registered for the webinar will get an email with a link as well. So feel free to review that, especially if you had any trouble with the audio. You can catch everything there and forward it to coworkers as well if anybody else would be interested in it. We usually also do a blog post summarizing some of the key points of the webinar, and I've seen a couple questions come through about sharing the Q&A. In that blog post, we'll pull out some of the big or most kind of reiterated questions to make sure that we are addressing those ones that we didn't get to during the live webinar. So thanks again, everyone. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you at the next one.